And now for a youth-led conversation on how to mobilize a generation of young people for the SDGs, hosted by the Big Six youth organizations.
Hello, everyone. Today we're joined by 5 amazing young people from different organizations within the Big Six youth organization. So they're going to be having a conversation just to tell us about their journey on the work that they've been doing for the SDGs. And the title of our session is going to be How to Mobilize Millions for the Goals. So I'll pass on the mic to you and just to let us know who you are and just explain a little bit about your journey and what you've done and what has brought you to where we are now. So I'll start with you, Chamatha. Take the floor.
Hi everyone, I'm Chamatya from Sri Lanka. I'm representing the World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts, which is the largest voluntary organization for girls and young women in the world. I think my journey in taking action on SDGs started actually with the Millennium Development Goals, and then it continued to the SDGs because I think WAGs as a global movement was very focused on taking action, but also developing the leadership skills in girls and young women around the world on causes that they believed in and they were passionate about. And definitely one of the areas that we worked was on gender equality and empowering girls and young women. So I think I have been in the Girl Scouts and Girl Guides movement for the past almost 20 years. I started off as a girl guide when I was, very young and around 8 years, and then continued to, grow in the movement and also take action on different areas, different thematic areas. And currently, I'm also serving in the Beijing Plus 25 Youth Task Force, which is a global task force set up by UN Women to take action and support for the review process and the Generation Equality Forum, which is going to be the accelerating agenda for gender equality and empowerment of girls and women around the world. And so it was for me, I think, the fact that I was very passionate about working on gender equality, on achieving gender equality around the world, but also specifically in Sri Lanka, because we had a lot of issues around harassment, gender-based violence, and the lack of awareness and education that we have around this thematic area. So I think the curriculum that we developed from WAGS, which is Voices Against Violence, along with the Stop the Violence campaign, we've managed to reach out to the grassroots level and the local areas in Sri Lanka. And then I think my journey on taking action started from there. Then, of course, I went on with my team to do the same for Bangladesh Girl Guides Association. So it wasn't just in Sri Lanka, but I was involved in 2 countries to see how gender equality and empowerment of girls and young women is really taking action and speaking out. And also how to educate and raise awareness among our girls and young women to be able to take action and speak out on the same, and for them to be part of SDGs journey too. So I think I started from there. And then I would really like to hear what Meti would like to share with us on how her journey started and also a little bit about herself.
Thank you, Chamatia. I hope I said that right, hopefully. I started out with the YWCA. I'm from Ethiopia, so I work for the YWCA of Ethiopia, but I'm also involved with the World YWCA, which is the Young Women's Christian Association. It is a very big movement. We're active in more than 120 countries from different backgrounds, from different perspectives, and it is uniquely a diverse collection of young women and sometimes men too. It's a movement that believes in gender equality, as it's been mentioned before. I think generally I started, I was a volunteer I started volunteering at the YWCA around 4 years ago. throughout that time, I became an intern at some point, and now I am a Youth Leadership Development Programs Coordinator, which is a very long title. But as it explains, basically, I work on empowering young people to basically work on the SDG goals, even if they might be from different backgrounds. Like, we work on climate justice, and we also work on gender equality, inclusive cities, different, basically all the SDG goals, because that's basically what we're aiming for by 2030. So so far it has been a bit of a challenge with a lot of the how to mobilize people, basically, and it has been an interesting journey, and I'm very happy to hear what you've had to say, and I'm also really excited to hear what Anna has to say.
Thank you. My name is Ana Clara Martí. I'm from Latin America, specifically from Uruguay, a small country in Latin America, and I am representing the World YMCA. I have a degree in education, and I am at present studying a master's degree in direction of international cooperation projects. And I have been involved with the YMCA since I was a child, and I am currently a member of the board of directors of the YMCA of Montevideo, which is the capital of Uruguay. I am also a member of the United Nations Advocacy Group of the World Alliance of YMCAs, and I have participated in several programs and groups, both locally and internationally. I have had the opportunity to connect with different youth groups, and I have represented Uruguay and Latin America in many opportunities on youth and 2030 agenda issues. Something about me, I have always been very concerned about the inequality that exists in my region. And this is one of the reasons why I think it is essential to work for the 2030 agenda. I believe that the 2030 agenda proposes a perspective that seeks to work actively to reduce these inequalities. In my experience, as I started to get more involved in the YMCA as an organization, I had the opportunity to work with people from all over the world, and I learned about different realities. And there I was able to realize that many of the problems that all of we have are the same, but in different contexts. And that is why I firmly believe that we need to work globally, even if the problems are local. And this is an opportunity that we have with the SDGs, and I think that we cannot waste it. So, Willy, what can you tell us about yourself and how you got involved with the SDGs?
Yeah, thanks, Anna. So a little about myself. I live in New York City now, but I grew up in the Atlanta area in Georgia. And I've been a scout, so I'm a representative here of the World Organization of the Scout Movement and World Scouting. I was a scout growing up. I joined when I was 12, and going through the program, it's such an amazing program where you can learn by doing. So you heard the stereotypical kind of like camping that you do as a scout, but then there's also an entire set of programs that you can do where you're learning to give back to the community, where you're growing as an individual. And I think all of that in the scouting program and a lot of the programs that you see here, and in fact, all of the programs here as part of the Big Six are really preparing young people to be leaders at the global level. So, I was a scout as a kid and then have gotten more involved in World Scouting as we come. And one of the things that I've noticed, and I'll speak kind of not to myself, but to the organization as a whole. And I love that Anna brought up this global and local kind of juxtaposition. And we hear that so much in UN materials and at NGOs at the world stage. So all the Big Six here, we hear that. And scouting is such a local activity. You might stereotypically hear about, if you guys have seen Up, you see like the merit badge for helping a grandma cross the street. Like there's so many of these like local things that you're doing as a scout. And what we've seen, like even during COVID, for instance, is, Irish scouts setting up programs to help at-risk people get groceries in their local communities, or Canadian scouts helping distribute masks, scouts from the US going to elderly homes to do shows through the windows because you can't go inside. So there's so many of these like local things that scouts are doing around the world in their communities. They're learning by doing, they're being results and impact oriented, they're getting these things done. And it's cool to see that. And I think that's kind of the biggest driver for a lot of these SDGs work at, especially at a youth organization level, is how many, millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of youth we have around the world that are doing things within their local community. And then of course there's the global element, which is what a lot of what we do. So like this event, the SDG Action Zone at the UN level, World Scouting has some programming at the world level for its own members. And seeing the juxtaposition of these two has been really cool for the SDGs and for a lot of events here. So I'll pass the last one to Mel to talk a little bit about herself.
Thanks, Larry. So my name is Mel Tran. I'm from Australia. I'm a product designer and social entrepreneur, but I'm also part of the Duke of Edinburgh's International Award. The reason I decided to take action for the SDG is because of one simple fact, and that is disability drives innovation. And I think for far too long, young people with disability have been unheard of. And we've been fighting the battles of inclusion and diversity and equality for far too long. But I think what really motivates me is the fact that the SDG had the power to mobilize millions of people. And when you combine that with the unique perspectives that are brought from each individual, that's how we can achieve greater impact. So it's been amazing to be able to hear about some of your experiences and why you decided to take action for the SDG. But I think when we talk about youth engagement and youth leadership, I think we often get asked, what are the biggest misconceptions when you think sorry, should we restart that? One of the common questions that we get asked is, what are the biggest misconceptions when you think adults cold when wanting to work with young people? Really, I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, of course. I think that's such an interesting question. I have a couple that I'll just talk about here. One of the things that you'll hear a lot in the UN level, and especially at a world stage, is we'll go out and try to pick out the kind of like flashy stories and the really important stories that are happening across the world. And those are, of course, extremely important and add a lot of value to their communities and to the world and to the global narrative. But so much of building strong communities is hard work over a long period of time. And it's happening at a small scale every single day across the world. And so I think that's something that's very important to remember, which is like, it's not, especially as an adult working with young people, it's not necessarily about creating the setup for the big story that's going to be in the news, but it's about what the day-to-day kind of actions of the young people that these adults are working with and how that is kind of affected. So I think that's one element that's really important. And in terms of helping that, I think, especially as a, and I'll talk a bit from my own experience and from what I've seen around myself, getting motivation right is important. So I think a lot of young people are excited. The reasoning behind what they're motivated by, you want them to have the right values, you want them to have the right why behind the work that they're doing. That's definitely critical. And while experience, as you get older and more senior in a career or just as you grow, experience may help a little bit with that why, but a lot of those whys can be set up pretty well, even for young people at a young age. Now, the part that's really helpful, that experience helps a lot with, where an adult can really help here, is just the question of how to get started. There's a lot of very small scale programming within scouting that ask you to so like within the Boy Scouts of America, there's programs that help you wash the dishes at home, or to contribute to your family life. And there are these small things that build up over time that get people contributing to their local communities and soon to their local governments. So I think that's a really important part, is that like slowly building up over time. And then even on the larger scale projects, the question of like how to get started, where to jump in, I think that's something that is very helpful in terms of just like, mentorship from adults. The other kind of interesting thing is, I think, engaging with peers and having peers be mentors to youth. This is something that, a teacher told me once when I was in like 3rd grade, and the teacher was like, no matter what I say to you, the 5th grader, what they tell you is gonna, be more important than what I tell you this entire lesson, right? And so I think that's a really insightful kind of like nugget of information where, if you want to get a 3rd grader to be very excited or to do something a certain way, it's in many ways behooves you to like get the 5th grader and the 4th grader involved in that kind of mentorship. So I think those 3 things. So one is like focusing on the kind of long-term systemic kind of work that's happening day to day rather than the flashy stories. Giving tips around young people of how to get started and how to get executing on some of the ideas that they have with the right motivations. And then the last is engaging their peers for mentorship. So with that, I'll pass it to Anna Clara to kind of talk about her thoughts here.
Thanks, Willie. I think that one of the main misconceptions adults have when working with young people is that they think that we are here like to fill in a space, but we are here because we have the capacity to be here, not because it's okay to have young people, but because I think that we have something to say. Personally, it has happened to me that some adults are surprised when I do a good job or present a good project. And they are not surprised if that project is proposed by someone over 40 years old, for instance. And I think the main problem is that they look more at who is proposing it and not at what they are saying or the impact it might have. And I think it's fundamental that we are aware of this, and we should be permanently preparing new young people who can be tomorrow in the places that we are now. And it's about, I don't know, but generating spaces for debate, for discussion, and making the 2030 agenda known in places where there are young people who could be interested in that. And this means that like the circle is never broken, and there is always a young person somewhere in the world doing something to change the reality. And I think that something similar as Willie was saying, but we need to work with the young people we know so that they can trust them and show the adult world that they have a lot to contribute. And I think it's important to work with adults, but first you have to work with young people so that they feel confident to share their ideas and their opinions. And at this point, it is important to work as a team so that young people can share their experiences and they feel more confident with their peers. What can you tell us about this, Mel?
Thanks, Anna. I think there is a more fascinating point, and there are many assumptions, I think, about when you think about working with young people. But there's another element that we should add to this as well. I think being a woman with a disability and adding that to the equation of being a young person also brings a unique and very fascinating perspective to the work that I do. And if we were to look at some of the world's largest global youth organizations, like the Duke of Edinburgh's International Award, it's a perfect example of a model that successfully brings young people and is driven by and for young people. But I think personally, I see leadership as something that's being built from the ground up. And it's as much about businesses and organizations using the resources to create a platform so that the voices of young people can be heard. And I think young people have the desire and the ability and the opportunity to create social change. But it really is dependent on that strong collaborative relationship, as you both have mentioned. Because that's only when young people work together with the industry and leaders and stakeholders, that's when we can achieve so much more. But I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this meeting.
Thanks, Mel. I think you brought up a lot of interesting ideas on what we were trying to discuss. And I think two of the most common misconceptions that always irritate me when we're talking about young people and youth engagement, it's always the idea, especially, I don't know if it's the same everywhere, but during my work in Ethiopia, it's always the idea that young people are lazy and we don't care as much as adults. And also, there's also this misconception that wisdom only comes from people that are much older or that have been through life, and that we young people only come up with fresh, bright ideas. But that's not true. Like, young people can be wise, young people can go through experiences that shape us, young people can be mature, and it's the generalization entirely. It's like how we were generalized as this group of people who can be labeled as good or bad, and from place to place it's always a different idea, and we've already been labeled as a group basically, and we have to fight that stigma, which is ridiculous because we're people, and someday we're going to get older and we're going to be part of the adults group, and then we're going to have to deal with these things when engaging young people. And I think the one thing we have to understand when we're talking about this is that young people can be as wise, and we're not one group. We're different people. We're different individuals who come from different backgrounds and who have different ideas and who bring different things to the table, basically. And I think that's something that needs to be understood, especially when people are trying to work with young people, basically. And I think that's something that needs to be well understood before trying to engage anyone, especially because it's very irritating to us to be treated as part of a group when we're individuals. And I would love to hear what you have to say, Chamatia. So I'm going to give the mic over to you.
Thanks, Mary. And I think I agree with all the sharings from other speakers as well, because I think we collectively face such misconceptions when we want to have young people working on these agendas and processes. And one thing I could say from my experience is that a lot of people have the myths and misconceptions around young people not being as experienced or as not educated enough or skilled enough, and sometimes they could be troublemakers if we give them that position in a decision making table. And I think that is a barrier that we all have to kind of overcome, and which is very unfortunate because it's so important to have the youth voices in the table. We don't want people to say, oh, young people are facing something like this. We want young people to come to the table and say what the issues that they face or what the work that they are doing. So I think the representation and inclusion of young people at all levels of decision making is very, very crucial. And I think that's another, intergenerational kind of issue that we face across all borders and, even at global spheres. And one example that I could give from our organization is that I was a World Board member and the youngest to be serving in the World Board. I was appointed when I was around 25, and we've rarely had any, young person at a global decision-making level as such. So I think now we are actually changing as an organization, and what we've experienced is that from recent research we did is that young people saying, and especially young women and girls are saying that they're ready to take up decision-making roles. It's just we need to give them that space and that capacity and build their skills to be able to do that. So I think as an organization and movement, what we are doing is we are constantly bringing and giving the girls and young women the experimental learning that they could have by taking action on SDGs, on different other projects, so that they're able to build their skills and build their knowledge on different areas, and be able to, be part of a process or system equally with the adults. So I think that's one of the best practices that we try to do in our movement is, through different programs and different projects, we try to engage girls and young women equally along with adults, so that they're able to build that experience and capacity to be able to be part of this. And I think another factor is that, what we find is that sometimes, like, what we earlier heard, that they feel that young people are not as interested, in any of this, but that's not true. We have a lot of young people, and I think our organizations are a great example for that. The action that young people are taking around the world, especially whether it's global warming, or whether it's on gender equality, or whether it's on, the recent COVID situation, we saw how much young people contributed and took action and was really coming forth to support each other. So I think these are great, learnings for all of us. And from there, I would like to move on to the next area that we would like to explore as a group is, that to see what has worked in our communities in terms of SDG activation. And I would really like to hear what Meti would like to add on to that.
Thanks, Chamatia. Basically, when we come to how to engage young people and what's worked well in our community so far, especially in my community, where let me YWCA. So in YWCA Ethiopia, we have a specific quota, basically. So there's an immense amount of, like, almost 95% of all staff are young people under the age of 30. And the board is same thing with the board, and even the world board, there's space for youth representation. So I think these are good approaches in trying to engage young people and to bring them to the table so that we can discuss our issues equally. But another thing also is, one experience I can raise is when we were working on one of the projects we work on is trying to create a safe and more inclusive community for everyone. And we work in very vulnerable communities where there's already a stigma on young people and how they can be nothing but troublemakers, and trying to get them to understand that there's more, especially when you have a stigma your entire life, you start believing it and then you start acting on it. And so that was basically what was happening, but we worked on finding ways to make sure that they were actively engaged. And we tried this form of training where you can try mindset change, basically, and trying to make them believe in the ideas on trying to create a much safer community for themselves. And it is one of the most effective, I've worked on different projects so far, and it's one of the most effective approaches I've ever seen in trying to engage youth, because they understand, when we understand that it's for our own common good, then we start to work as hard for it. And it's usually this misunderstanding that always creates a gap and that brings the misconceptions that we were talking about earlier. So with that, I would love to hear, I'm going to come back to you, Chamatia, and I would love to hear what you have to add on this.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, especially in terms of SDGs, I think I could probably be sharing my personal experience directly on taking action on, like I said, the SDG that I worked on gender equality and empowerment of girls and young women. And I think what's critical here is that to see how far that we were able to create education through our non-formal educational curriculum called Voices Against Violence. And we were able to really take it into the grassroots level and really reach out to not just only girls and young women, but also boys, men, adults, teachers, all stakeholders, around the country. And then also to see how they speak out and take action afterwards. And also another part of it was breaking, like you said, the stigma, the stereotypes, the attitudes people have towards taking action or speaking out, especially on a sensitive area like this. And I think what we managed to do was to really give that awareness and education so that they're able to understand and then progress towards a change in behavior and attitudes. So we managed to do this in a way that we were able to monitor how far we progress. And we're very happy with the results we were able to achieve. And one important factor is that the importance and the recognition people have towards non-formal education. And I think it's common to all of us organizations. And it's important that people actually identify that it is as equally important as formal education, and what we contribute as movements and organizations that really depend on non-formal education. And it is really have been a great learning experience for me to see how it worked in Sri Lanka, and also when we took the same to Bangladesh and how it worked there. And our best practices that we have been sharing with each other as South Asian countries, and also where the similarities were, where the differences were, and how different we have to approach certain situations. So I think our activation actually started from there, particularly on taking that SDG into the grassroots level and how people involve with each other. But that was primarily on taking action on gender-based violence. But we've also been very, very active in, speaking about climate change and on earth conservation and global warming and also economic justice and how we empower young people economically and give them that education and skills to be able to thrive in the future. And then I'll probably move on to the next speaker to hear what he has to share. I think, Billy, you can take on from there.
Yeah. Yeah, and thinking about what's worked in communities and in Scout communities for SDG activation, I think there's a couple of things here too. One of them is, it's similar to what Chamathia was saying at the beginning of this. These organizations have been around before the SDGs. They've been around before the MDGs. And they've been doing work that might be classified as SDGs work since far before, and will likely exist far after the SDGs or whatever new framework or program that comes from the UN since then. So I think that's important to remember, is the alignment and the long-term kind of alignment with the kind of stated goals of the SDGs that these programs have been pushing for a long time. And the way that they kind of do it, one element that's very tactically that has worked for the scouting program and the scouting movement is just incentivization through patches and rank advancement and awards. This is like a very common thing that you may have heard of. So I think that's been helpful because it gives a narrative around just an amount of like work that some scout is doing across the world. They can tie it to some global narrative, and then in many cases like that might be brought up to recognition that gives them a way to explain it to other people very quickly. So that kind of like shared narrative is important. The other thing is making it fun. So while there is a large group of, classifying all young people as being disinterested and working on, let's say like serious issues or serious problems is definitely inaccurate and wrong. There's a large group of young people who do care deeply about this and will be working on it, a lot. And I would say most young people care about this to some degree. The other element that's important, especially as you get to younger and younger kids, is making it fun and bringing kids into the program is important. So I think that's a big part of the Scout program is the kind of joke that we make is like, we create this fun program that like kids come and have a good time, and then before they know it, they've like learned something, and so that's worked, I think, a lot for scouting. The other thing that's been interesting is just focusing on results and impact. I think when we talk about our generation, especially with the internet, there's been such a personalization of a lot of big kind of news narratives. So I think these like grand August narratives and stories don't necessarily move our generation as much as they may have a few generations before. And so, every story that we hear has a personal touch, it has an insider touch, and a lot of it's, adding transparency to what we hear in the news. And so I think a focus on like the core substance of the results and the impact over a lot of the grander narratives is kind of important for for our generation. So one of the things that Scouting does here is so we've created a measurement program to track SDGs across the world and the amount of hours being contributed to it, the projects that are being involved in it. That's at sdgs.scout.org, and it's just an easy way of knowing like how well the program has been doing towards, or what the program has been contributing towards SDGs. And it also gives a platform for, I think, much needed recognition. And this is for, people of all age groups, but also, specifically for young people, this, the ability to kind of show off a little bit the work that they've been doing is quite important. So I think those two have been really good from a Scouting perspective in terms of activating the community. And with that, I'll go to Mel again.
I think for me, the Duke of Edinburgh's International Award was one of the many experiences that taught me the importance of strengthening the global connections and the power of being connected to leaders around the world who are ultimately working toward the same vision. An example of this on a local level here in Australia is one of the social enterprises that I work with called Hire Up. So Hire Up is an online platform that allows Australians with a disability to find, hire and manage their own support workers who are able to assist with daily living activities. But the concept itself addresses a fundamental human right to be included and to participate and to contribute. And I think it really is one of the most important lessons that I've learned as a product designer, as a social entrepreneur, is to be brave, to be bold, and to be innovative, because challenges can be turned into opportunities. And that's precisely what brings all of us here today. And with that, I think I'd love to hear from you, Anna, and hear about your experience with this as well.
Thank you, Mel. At this point, I find it interesting to share 4 ideas that I think are very related to the activation of the SDGs. Firstly, in our organization, something that has worked very well is to carry out the planning of our activities within the framework of the SDGs. This implies that when planning, we associate the objectives of our activities with the SDGs, and we are aware of how we are contributing to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. Secondly, I think that whenever we promote projects and leaders with a strong impact on the community, we are working for the SDGs. And it is important that we are clear about this. If we want to be part of the Decade of Action, we must generate projects that focus on the transformation of our communities. The third thing is that I think that we should always promote the 2030 Agenda with volunteers and staff from our organizations, but also in our families and with our friends, because every time someone new knows about what it is about, there is a greater chance that they will get involved in the issue, and that's very, very important. Fourth and finally, as Willie shared, I think that a great lesson from the 2030 Agenda is that it is very important to measure the impact of our actions. And the SDGs provide us with indicators to measure what we do. And that allows us to clearly define what needs to be done. And without knowing what needs to be done, we cannot think about multilateral projects. The 2030 Agenda is very wide and focuses on fundamental aspects for all our countries, the planet, prosperity, peace, partnerships, and people. It doesn't matter what region we belong to. And it addresses very diverse issues, such as the environment, inequality, education, employment. So I think that as youth organizations, we have the responsibility to generate projects with young people that address these issues and contribute to creating a more equal world. All of our organizations have been working with youth for over 100 years. And I think that one thing that has become clear in all this time is that we need young people to make a difference. So SDGs are challenging and there is still a lot of work to be done, for sure. But we are convinced that by involving young people and responding to their needs and interests, we can work hard in this decade to achieve it. So thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you. It has been so inspiring just listening to everything, your journeys, what you've gone through, the challenges, and how you've kept going throughout the years. I mean, we often hear about how young people constitute the largest generation in history. And obviously that also means that they hold the largest capacity to achieve the SDGs and the next developmental agendas post 2030. So I just hope that this conversation that we had, I mean, as Willie was saying earlier, that, you know, the third grader listening to the fifth grader, I felt that way just being part of the conversation with other young people. I mean, it's important for the intergenerational exchange and the intergenerational collaboration, but it was also inspiring just to hear from young people about their journeys and everything. I'm just hoping that the conversation that we had today and the conversations that we're going to have offline after this with other people will help us to mobilize millions for the goals and probably help also other young people, governments and civil society organizations and everyone else in the world to just take action for the SDGs and for the development of our communities. So thank you again.